Conspiracies, the Waco incident. So let's start, guys. Over the past 20 years, several events have shaken America and made the significant minority of Americans deeply cynical about the behavior of their own government. Among the most significant of these is the incident that took place at the Branch Davidian compound near Waco, Texas, in early 1993. This culminated in the loss of more than 90 lives as the government appeared to declare war on a tiny religious sect. The sect in question, the Branch Davidians, were an offshoot of the Seventh day Adventist movement. So, what is an offshoot of? Was an offshoot of an offshoot. I gather that it is something. Okay, so it's just like a branch, stem. They had been based in a compound called Mount Carmel outside Waco since 1930s. By 1955, the leadership of the group had passed to one Benjamin Roden, who was succeeded in time by his wife Louise. In 1981, a charismatic young man named Vernon Howell joined the group, and he soon became a leading light, especially after he began an affair with a much older Louis. A power struggle began between Howell and Louis's son, George. George Roden was initial victor, and Howell left the group to start his own splinter group in 1984. Splinter means sliver of wood, astilla, break into splinters, astilla. Sliver or sliver? Sliver of wood. Vernon Howell began to impose his own vision to the sect, on the sect. He decided that he was a messiah figure and should be allowed to be polygamous. He was believed to have recruited as many as 12 women as his concubines, some of them the wives of other members, and some of them as young as 12 years old. As the Messiah, he also exempted himself from the sect's restriction on diet and alcohol. In 1990, he gave himself a new, rather more biblical sounding name, David Koresh. His teachings became increasingly apocalyptic, with the United States government being denounced continually as Babylonians. The compound we renamed the compound was renamed Ranch Apocalypse. The group stockpiled enough food to last for a year, as well as large quantities of arms and ammunition. Dealing in guns legally also became a significant source of income for the group. Gradually, the activities of the Branch Davidians and their leaders started to worry their Texan neighbors. Reports began to appear in the newspapers that Koresh had been accused of abusing children. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms started taking an interest in the group. When a postman reported the delivery of what appeared to be grenade casings, the investigation intensified, and the Bureau found evidence of several minor firearms violations. Rather than simply waiting for Koresh to make one of his regular visits to the city, however, the BATF decided to launch a huge raid on the compound. Scheduled for 28 February 1993, it was meant to be a surprise, but news crews had been tipped off, and the BAP helicopter flying over the compound shortly beforehand must have warned the residents that something was amiss. Something was amiss, and amiss means malo, equivocado. You know something's amiss when Kathy hasn't posted a selfie for 3 days. Amiss. Forced to retreat, the agents approached the compound that Sunday morning in vehicles disguised as cattle trailers. However, the French Davidians were not fooled, and the situation very quickly got out of control. As the agents approached the compound, shots rang out. It is still not clear who fired first, with both sides accusing the other, but before long, a full scale gun battle had broken out. By the time the shooting ended, our BATF agents and five branch Davidians were dead and many more were injured. The Ba'ath had been forced to retreat because they had underestimated the firepower and determination of the sect members. The raid had been an unqualified disaster which had been caught on film for the world to see. Still, the government could not back down now, so siege began immediately, with the FBI soon taking over the leadership from the BATF. The siege lasted for 51 days. During that time, the FBI seemed to employ two distinct tactics. On the one hand, hostage negotiators talked regularly with David Koresh, and in the early days of the siege, they secured the release of several groups of members, mostly children. However, although the negotiators were accustomed to hostage situations, this one was very different. The remaining people inside the compound did not see themselves as hostages. They were determined to stay with their leader, and it became increasingly clear that Koresh was not intending to live in the near future. At the same time, hostile tactics were also being used. After a while, the electricity was cut off to the compound, and later giant floodlights were trained on the building in order to prevent the occupants from sleeping. Notoriously, the FBI also played tapes at deafening volume to demoralize the occupants. The sounds of the tapes included Tibetan Buddhist chants, bagpipes, seagulls crying, helicopters, dentists' drills, sirens, dying rabbits, a train and songs by Alice Cooper and Nancy Sinatra. Such tactics had been seen to be useful in the operation against the Panamanian leader General Noriega a couple of years before. But the branch Davidians a couple of years, but the branch Davidians seemed to be made of sterner stuff. Sterner, sterner means severo, severo, severe, serious, severe. And the FBI started to run out of patience. The operation was enormously expensive, and the eyes of the world were upon it. Surely, surely they might, surely the might of the American government could not be halted by a handful of religious fanatics. Up in flames, BATF agents entered a building on the compound through a window. Eventually, Attorney General Janet Reno approved plans for a final assault. This was launched on the morning of Monday, 19 April. The FBI called the compound to warn the occupants that they would be using tear gas. Armed vehicles then approached the compound, punched holes in the walls, and sprayed tear gas into the building. Still, the Davidians refused to leave. Instead, they started firing at the vehicles. Then the telephone was thrown out, sign that the talking was over. Later, towards noon, as the FBI pondered its next move, the compound went up in flames. Fires were raging, and these were soon punctuated by huge explosions. Finally, nine occupants emerged, One woman came out with her clothing in flames and then tried to go back in. She was restrained by a BATF agent and taken to safety. It was too dangerous for firefighters to approach the blaze. Even when it appeared to be in its last stages, soldier was shot at when he approached the building. Eventually, however, the compound was razed to the ground and the FBI was able to inspect the damage. They found 80 dead bodies amongst the rubble, of which 23 were children, 14 of whom were fathered by Koresh. The body of Koresh himself was identified by his dental records. He had been shot in the head. This was an operation that had gone about as wrong as it possibly could. The FBI tried to stress that the Branch Davidians had set the fires themselves and so had committed mass suicide. But it was inevitable that the conspiracy theorists would soon get to work. Deliberate murder? Essentially, the conspiracy theorists were all saying the same thing, that the FBI had deliberately murdered the Branch Davidians. Evidence for this, however, was at first slight, but the dogged investigations of a right-wing maverick named Michael McNulty started to raise embarrassing questions. So, essentially, the conspiracy theorists were all saying the same thing, that the FBI had deliberately murdered the Branch Davidians. Evidence for this, however, was at first slight, but the dogged investigations, what's the meaning of dogged? Dogged investigations, terco, obstinado, testarudo, stubborn, but the dogged investigations of a right wing maverick. What's a maverick? Maverick means non-conformist, inconformista, dissidente. A right wing maverick named Michael McNulty started to raise embarrassing questions. He would air his findings in two successful films about the affair, the Academy Award nominated Waco, The Rules of Engagement, and Waco, A New Revelation. Two key allegations are made by Mike Nolte. The first is that the FBI caused the fires. After the event, the FBI had always maintained that it had not used any flammable substance or weapon in its assault on the compound. McNulty discovered, however, that flammable tear gases canisters had been used in the attack. The FBI finally reversed its earlier statements and admitted this in 1999. Secondly, McNulty examined heat sensitive film of the operation, noticed flashes coming from behind the building. These, he claimed, were muzzle flashes. Muzzle, muzzle means boca amordazar, hocico amordazar. Muzzle flashes. Tried, where was I? Muzzle flashes. Proof that the FBI had been firing on anyone trying to escape the fire. Some of McNulty's other charges were supported by rather less documentary evidence. They included the suggestion that soldiers from the Army's super secret Delta Force participated in the attack, that handheld grenade launchers were fired at the kitchen and could have ignited the fire, and that a demolition charge was placed on the roof of the bunker, which was detonated by remote control. So, how has the FBI responded to these charges? The explosion in the bunker has been blamed on the quantity of arms possessed by the occupants. The use of grenade launchers and the active involvement of Delta Force soldiers, though they were acknowledged to have been present, were both flatly denied. The flashes on the heat resistant film were written off as reflected sunlight, with experts with experts One was high, with experts pointing out that a muzzle would have to be attached to a human being who would also show up on heat resistant film. As for the flammable CS gas canisters, As for the flammable CS gas canisters, the FBI says that they were launched 4 hours prior to the fire breaking out, but in any case, they had failed to reach their target. This was backed up by a civil jury, Congress, the court, and the special counsel who, in the year 2000, all concluded that the FBI had not caused the fire. The FBI also pointed out they had introduced bugging devices into the compound which clearly record cult members spreading fuel about and preparing to light it. Tragic consequences. All this, of course, has cut little eyes with conspiracy theorists. What they and many other Americans point out was that here was a religious group surrounded by government forces but still going up in flames. The Waco incident made for potent TV images and proved a powerful recruiting aid for the far right militias. This incident would bear terrible fruit 2 years later when, on the anniversary of the Waco deaths, a young man named Timothy McVeigh decided to take vengeance on the government by perpetrating the Oklahoma City bombing. So, do the conspiracists have a point? Could Waco have been massive plot by the government against its own people? It seems unlikely because, in the final analysis, there is no reason why the government would have actively wanted to bring about the annihilation of this obscure religious cult. What seems far more likely is that this was simply a disastrously badly handled affair. It was less a conspiracy than a shambles. What's shambles? Shambles. Shambles means disaster. Shambles. It was less a conspiracy than a shambles. Unfortunately, however, the consequences of the government's action were tragic, both in the short and the long term. All these, of course, had cut. All these had cut little eyes with conspiracy theories. Cut little eyes. What's the meaning of little eyes? That seems like an idiomatic phrase. Little eyes. To cut little eyes. There's nothing like that here. What's the meaning of cut little eyes? Well, for these cases, I go to the AI. I go to AI to find out. So all these, of course, has got little eyes with conspiracy theories. I will ask AI to tell me what the fuck does cut little eyes mean. So, oh fuck, I don't like this. So do as el inglés, and I go here. Oh no. ¿Qué significa cut little eyes? Como ven, all these, all these has cut little eyes with conspiracy theorists. Theorists. It says here. La expresión cuddly lie significa algo que no tiene mucho efecto, no impresiona ni convence a nadie. Si algo capsize con alguien, eso no cambia su opinión. Es como decir no le hacen ni cosquillas. All this has cuddly lies with conspiracy theories. Todo eso no ha convencido ni afectado a los que creen en conspiraciones. All this has cuddly lies with conspiracy theories. The teacher's warning: cut no eyes with noisy students. Cut no eyes. Okay, that was it for the conspiracy section. Now let's move on to philosophy. And we are going to read something about our friend Walter Benjamin. Walter Benjamin here. We're gonna say the only way of knowing a person is to love them without hope. Walter Benjamin, 1892 1940. In context, branch ethics, Frankfurt School. Okay, Frankfurt School. Before 380 BCE, Plato writes his Symposium, considered the first sustained philosophical account of love. 1863, the French writer Charles Baudelaire explores the idea of the flaneur, the person who walks the city to experience it. After 1955, Guy Debord establishes psychogeography, the study of the effects of geography on an individual's emotions and behavior. 1972, Italian novelist Italo Calvino explores the relationships between cities and science in his book Invisible Cities. The German philosopher Walter Benjamin was an affiliate of the Frankfurt School, a group of neo Marxist social theorists who explored the significance of mass culture and communication. Benjamin was also fascinated by the techniques of film and literature, and his 1926 essay, One Way Street, is an experiment in literary construction. Here he puts together a collection of observations, intellectual and empirical, that apparently occur to him as he walks down an imaginary city street. In the essay, Benjamin does not set out the grand theory. Instead, he wants to surprise us with ideas in the same way that we might be surprised by something catching our eye while on a walk. Towards the end of the essay, he says that quotations in my work are like wayside robbers who leap out, brandishing weapons and relieve the idler of his certainty. Wayside robbers, okay. Illuminating love. The idea that the only way of knowing a person is to love them hopelessly appears in the middle of the essay under the heading Arkland. In a flare of light, Benjamin pauses and thinks just this and no more. The essay moves immediately afterwards to a new section. We are forced to guess what he means. Is he saying that knowledge arises out of love? Or that it is only when we stop hoping for some outcome that we can clearly see the beloved? We cannot know. All we can do is walk down the street alongside Benjamin, experiencing the flare of light of these passing thoughts. So here there's a saying of Walter Benjamin: the construction of life currently lies far more in the hands of facts than of convictions. And I truly agree with Walter Benjamin. That was everything for today, guys. Thank you for being there. And please come back for more reading about literature, philosophy, and conspiracy theories. See you next time.